So Drake is being called out right now by Suge Knight.
Anything wrong. Anything can happen, anything go wrong. And the tragedy is always there.
Because Drake posted a Tupac chain on his Instagram, and you guys know he's a fan.
In prison, you live for that moment. You live for day to day.
Drake bought Tupac's crown ring for over $1 million at a New York City auction.
Leaked fight footage between Drake and Suge Knight just hit the internet, and the culture can't stop talking. What started as a simple Instagram flex has spiraled into one of the most explosive hip-hop controversies of 2025. Drake thought he was paying tribute to Tupac's legacy, but instead, he found himself face-to-face with the wrath of Death Row's founder. The footage that's now gone viral doesn't just show a heated clash, it exposes deeper questions about authenticity, respect, and who really controls the legacy of hip-hop's most legendary figures. And with Suge Knight making his voice heard straight from behind bars, this story just went from jewelry drama to full-blown war. It all started with one Instagram story. On August 24th, 2025, Drake posted himself rocking a diamond-flooded Death Row Records chain. At first, it looked like just another flex from one of the richest rappers alive, but this wasn't any regular piece of ice. Fans instantly noticed the chain was nearly identical to the one Tupac wore on the cover of All Eyes on Me. The internet went crazy. Was this the actual chain Pac once wore? Did Drake just drop hundreds of thousands or even $1 million on a piece of hip-hop history? It wasn't the first time Drake made headlines for collecting Tupac memorabilia. Back in 2023, he bought Pac's legendary crown ring for over $1 million at a New York auction, complete with airtight paperwork and authentication. That move earned him respect, even from critics, because it was official, documented, and historic. But this chain? This was different. No auction receipts, no provenance, no seller information, just a flashy post and a captionless flex. And in hip-hop, where symbols carry power, that was all it took for speculation to explode. Some fans praised Drake for honoring a legend. Others accused him of trying to buy credibility after taking that massive L in his beef with Kendrick Lamar, a beef where Drake had already caught heat for using AI to mimic Pac's voice. To them, this wasn't a tribute, it was provocation. But the real explosion came when one man decided to speak up. The very man who created the Death Row chain in the first place, Suge Knight. On paper, this should have been another clean win for Drake, a museum-grade piece, posted, praised, and archived. But the moment that Death Row chain hit his IG, something felt off. There were no receipts, no auction house, no seller, no provenance, no certificate, nothing. Just a close-up flex and the internet left to connect the dots. And that's where the cracks started showing. Because the last time Drake bought a piece of Pac history, the 2023 crown ring, it came with airtight paperwork and universal respect. This time, radio silence. The timing didn't help either. It's August 2025, barely a year after Kendrick handed Drake the ugliest L of his career. The West Coast is still side-eyeing him, and the culture hasn't forgotten that AI Tupac voice fiasco that forced Drake to pull a track. So when he pops out wearing a Death Row chain with no proof and a perfectly placed All Eyes on Me reference, the vibe shifts from tribute to strategy. To Drake's fans, it read like love for a legend. To his critics, especially on the West, it felt like credibility cosplay. And that's why this chain wasn't just different. It was dangerous. Because in hip-hop, you can wear the ice. But if you can't prove the story behind it, the story will come for you. To outsiders, it might look like just another piece of flashy jewelry, but inside hip-hop, the Death Row chain is sacred ground. Back in the 90s, Suge Knight designed it to be more than ice. It was a flag, a symbol of rank, loyalty, and the dangerous energy that made Death Row Records the most feared label in the game. Only a handful were ever created. Estimates say 5 to 10 authentic pieces exist in the entire world. They weren't sold, they weren't auctioned, and they definitely weren't made for outsiders. These chains were earned, passed down to insiders like Snoop, Dre, and a select few who bled for the label. And Tupac? The chain he wore wasn't even his. After Suge bailed him out of prison in 1995, Pac asked to wear Suge's personal chain, not because of diamonds, but because of brotherhood. That moment sealed their bond and immortalized the chain on the cover of All Eyes on Me. That's what makes this controversy so explosive, because this isn't just about Drake buying a chain. It's about him stepping into a legacy that represents loyalty, power, and bloodlines, a legacy you can't swipe a card to own. And when the wrong person wears it, the culture reacts like it's a crime scene. The second Drake story went live. The culture split down the middle. Some fans flooded the comments with praise, saying Drake was preserving hip-hop history, keeping Pac's memory alive for a new generation. But on the other side, the backlash came fast and loud. West Coast voices were the first to check him. Rappin' Forte, already salty over past beef with Drake, blasted him online, saying he had no right to wear something that belonged to Pac's legacy. Collectors chimed in too, warning that if the chain wasn't fully authenticated, it was nothing more than a costume piece. And then the deeper critiques rolled in. People said it didn't belong around Drake's neck at all. It belonged with Pac's family or in a museum where the history couldn't be manipulated. To them, Drake wasn't paying homage. He was buying respect. Experts in hip-hop memorabilia started zooming in on photos, comparing Drake's chain to archived shots of the originals. They picked apart the diamond quality, the settings, the gold work, every detail, and the whispers grew louder. This piece didn't match up. What began as a flex turned into a public trial. Suddenly, the biggest rapper in the world wasn't being judged on his hits. He was being judged on a chain. And the verdict from the streets? Drake had some explaining to do. Then came the moment that flipped the whole story upside down. Suge Knight's voice from behind bars. On August 26, 2025, Suge called into the Art of Dialogue podcast from R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility. And what he dropped wasn't just commentary, it was history straight from the source. Suge didn't mince words. He said flat out, "That chain Drake posted, Pac never owned one. According to him, Tupac never had his own death row chain at all. The piece everyone remembers from the All Eyes on Me cover, that wasn't Pac's. It was Suge's personal chain, the one he handed to Pac as a show of brotherhood after bailing him out in 1995. The emotional weight behind his words was heavy. Suge described Pac calling him Big Bro and choosing to wear his chain instead of waiting for one to be made. To Suge, that bond mattered more than diamonds, and it made the piece legendary. And here's the kicker. Suge didn't blast Drake. He didn't call him a thief or a clout chaser. Instead, he suggested Drake got scammed. That some shady dealer finessed him into thinking he bought a piece of Pac's legacy, when in reality, the story didn't add up. But in making that claim, Suge dropped a bomb. If Pac never had a chain of his own, then the one Drake posted couldn't possibly be authentic. And just like that, the biggest rapper alive was now tangled in one of the most personal and most dangerous debates in hip-hop history. After Suge's bombshell, the culture wanted receipts, and he delivered. Suge zeroed in on the details, the kind of things only someone who commissioned the original chains would know. The most damning, an engraving on the back of Drake's piece that read, "All Eyes on You, 1996. According to Suge, no authentic death row chain ever had inscriptions. These weren't commercial pieces. They were one-of-a-kind signals of loyalty, never meant for the public eye. Then came the craftsmanship breakdown. Suge pointed out flaws in the diamond count and the quality of the setting, noting that the originals were iced out to perfection in the 90s with no shortcuts. By comparison, Drake's chain looked like a high-end replica, close enough to fool the casual fan, but miles away from the real thing. And Suge's message was blunt. Drake got played. Handle your business. For collectors, this wasn't just gossip. It was a nightmare scenario. If Drake, with all his money and access, could get finessed on a fake, then how many so-called authentic hip-hop artifacts out there were actually knockoffs? What started as a flex had now been downgraded to $1 million mistake, and the internet was eating it up. The second Suge's words hit the internet, the reaction was instant and explosive. Social media lit up like wildfire. Hashtags like #DrakeChain and #Suge Knight shot into the trending list. Memes, debates, and side-by-side comparisons flooded TikTok, YouTube, and X. Within hours, the story racked up millions of views. Some fans laughed at the idea of Drake dropping a bag on a fake chain. Others defended him, saying it wasn't about authenticity, it was about love for Pac. But the loudest voices were the ones calling it disrespectful, framing Drake as someone trying to buy his way into West Coast credibility. Then the cosigns came. Wack 100, one of the most outspoken figures in West Coast hip-hop, went live with DJ Academics, calling Drake's piece plastic play. Not long after, Reggie Wright Jr., Death Row's former head of security, backed Suge's claims, breaking down insider details only someone close to the label could know. Suddenly, this wasn't just Drake versus the internet. It was Drake versus the West Coast itself. And in hip-hop, when the streets, the OGs, and the history books all line up against you, the fallout can be brutal. Beneath the headlines, this wasn't just about Drake, or even a single chain. It was about the bigger battle over hip-hop's legacy. The market for rap memorabilia has exploded. Tupac artifacts especially are treated like rare art, pieces that can sell for millions. And with money like that on the table, scammers thrive. High-quality replicas get passed off as history, and even someone at Drake's level can get caught slipping. That's why Suge's voice cut through so sharply. From prison, he positioned himself as the guardian of Death Row's story, reminding the culture that not everything with diamonds and a logo is the real deal. For him, protecting Pac's memory isn't just personal, it's a mission. But there's an irony here, too. While the world debates Drake's chain, Suge is still locked down on a 28-year sentence. He may be behind bars, but his influence is still so strong that a single phone call can reshape how the culture views authenticity, loyalty, and respect. And that's the deeper truth. This isn't just a jewelry controversy. It's a reminder that in hip-hop, history isn't just owned, it's protected, challenged, and fought over. Just when the chain drama was already reaching a boiling point, the internet got hit with something nobody expected: leaked fight footage. The clip wasn't polished. It was shaky, grainy, recorded on a phone in what looked like a backstage area or dark hallway. But the chaos was undeniable. Drake surrounded by his team, voices shouting in the background, and right there in the middle of it all, the words "Pac's chain" being screamed over and over. Fans slowed the footage frame by frame. Some swore they saw Drake trying to break free, ready to swing. Others argued it was his security pulling him back, shielding him from an all-out brawl. At one point, the camera caught a flash of a man who looked eerily like Suge's people, barking across the room as tension spiraled. And here's the wild part. It didn't matter if the footage was authentic, edited, or even staged. The optics were enough to send social media into overdrive. The biggest rapper in the world, caught in what looked like a physical clash tied to one of the most controversial pieces of jewelry in hip-hop history. In an instant, the debate over paperwork and provenance turned into something bigger. It wasn't just about a chain anymore. It was about respect, legacy, and survival in a culture that doesn't forgive weakness. And for Drake, the timing couldn't have been worse. As the fight footage spread, the reactions were loud, but the industry itself stayed eerily quiet. Normally, when Drake is under fire, his peers, collaborators, and even brands rally around him. This time, nothing. No public defense from rappers, no cosigns from producers, not even a word from the labels. The silence was deafening. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that streaming platforms and corporate partners were quietly pausing deals tied to Drake. Nobody wanted to get caught in the crossfire of a feud involving Suge Knight and Tupac's legacy. The risk was too high. Even more telling, some West Coast voices who might have normally stayed neutral doubled down instead, echoing Suge's claims, reinforcing the idea that Drake was out of his depth. The chain was no longer just a controversy, it was becoming a liability. And in the music industry, once your name starts sounding like bad business, the doors close fast. For Drake, the silence wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous. Because in hip-hop, no support often speaks louder than any words. Now, Drake finds himself cornered in a way he's never experienced before. If he admits the chain was fake, he looks weak, finessed out of hundreds of thousands, maybe even $1 million, with the whole world watching. It would stain his image as a calculated, untouchable mogul who always plays above the game. But if he doubles down and claims it's real, he risks something even bigger, going head-to-head with Suge Knight's word. And in hip-hop, Suge's word still carries more weight than paperwork. No artist, no matter how successful, wants to publicly challenge the man who built Death Row and lived that history firsthand. That leaves Drake trapped in a no-win situation. Post another flex, and it looks like damage control. Stay silent, and it looks like guilt. Either way, the narrative keeps slipping further out of his hands. And that's the scariest part. For once, the most powerful rapper in the world isn't in control of the story. The culture is writing it for him. And right now, every lyric, every chain, every move he makes is being judged through the lens of Tupac's legacy and Suge Knight's shadow. As the dust settles, one truth becomes clear. This controversy is bigger than Drake, bigger than a chain, and even bigger than Suge Knight. What's really at stake here is Tupac's legacy. For nearly 3 decades, Pac's image, music, and memorabilia have carried untouchable weight in the culture. Every artifact tied to him, whether it's the crown ring, unreleased lyrics, or a Death Row chain, becomes more than just history. It becomes a symbol of who owns the narrative of hip-hop's most legendary figure. That's why the fight over this chain hits so hard. To some, Drake buying Pac memorabilia feels like preserving the past. To others, it feels like exploiting it. And when Suge speaks, it forces everyone to ask, who really has the right to control Pac's story? The fans, the family, the collectors, or the men who stood beside him when he was alive? This isn't just a debate about authenticity. It's about who gets to decide what's real, what's fake, and what stories the culture remembers. And in that fight, one thing's for sure. Tupac's name is still powerful enough to shake the entire industry, even decades after his death. So here's where it all lands. Drake thought he was honoring Tupac, but instead he walked straight into the middle of a cultural firestorm. A chain meant to flex turned into the biggest debate of 2025. Was it real history or just $1 million fake? And then you've got Suge Knight, still locked up, still shaping hip-hop from behind bars, dropping bombshells that flip the whole story on its head. To him, this isn't about clout or even Drake. It's about protecting Pac's memory, protecting Death Row's legacy, and making sure the truth doesn't get rewritten. At the end of the day, the footage, the backlash, and the prison phone calls prove one thing. Tupac's name still controls the culture, and anybody who touches it better be ready for the smoke. But what do you think? Did Drake get scammed, or is Suge rewriting history from his cell? Let me know in the comments. Smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story is far from over.